Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, Ad Nauseam listeners, to episode 162 of our little podcast. Reflecting back, Jeff, it's been a little more than 4 years, a kind of an Olympiad of our producing this show. How you feeling about it?
I'm feeling good. You know, I think we should start like the ancients, like organizing our notions of time.
Okay.
Around the Olympiad of Ad Nauseam years.
It was during the consulship of Winkle and Noe.
Right, exactly.
Consulibus Winkle et Noe.
It was the third month after the What's a Motto You
That's right.
episode. Right. Might confuse some people.
It was the best of podcasts. It was the worst of podcasts.
Yeah.
So we were reminiscing a little bit on the way over because we had to get over here old school.
We did.
Which was you picking me up in the Winkle mobile.
That's right.
Remember when we used to have to lug the tub around?
Oh, the tub. I don't miss the tub.
You don't miss the tub.
No.
So listeners may not know, but in the early days, we had to move. It was like a nomadic podcasting experience.
It was, yeah.
We would take the tub to the destination. The tub would disgorge its contents, and then we would set everything up, and then we'd take it all down, move around. Yeah. Eventually, when we got a little bit more of a listenership, we were able to invest in a larger tub, and then we graduated to a heavy duty tub.
That's right. I kind of missed that last tub.
You do?
I felt
right over here, Jeff.
There it is.
Can't you see it?
I felt like it's a symbol. I felt like that's when we really arrived.
We were just going to go from one tub to the next.
Right. We started with just the little the Tupperware.
That's right.
And then we had the big industrial tub.
Black with a red lid,
right,
looking very dramatic. But then, thanks to the generosity of RHB Bookstore and Coffee Shop, now we are permanently set up in this really comfortable Vomitorium South setting.
No, I think we should share with the audience when we came down to what I consider our sacred space.
Yes.
There were a couple of guys down here like measuring for curtains.
Yeah, the previous COO and some new bigwig at the establishment. Did we treat them with a dignity and respect, or throw them out on their ear?
Well, I think when you mentioned that or suspected that they were like scoping the room for for a jacuzzi.
That's right.
Yeah,
I started sweating bullets and wringing my hands.
Right, and their feathers got a little ruffled. That was my sense. Right?
Okay.
Exactly. So I think you're onto them.
I'm good at ruffling feathers. You know that.
Yes, that's one of your skills.
One of my many specialties. How are you feeling, Jeff?
I'm good. Yep, it finally today felt like fall out there. So I mean, It's the rain. It's kind of cooler temps, and I am not complaining. I mean,
that'll come later.
It'll come. Oh man, I'm on the verge. But the summer hung around for a long time.
It was great.
Yeah, it was great. But I have to admit, I was kind of getting tired of it.
Yeah,
I'm ready for some cool fall temps. And
eventually we'll have Smarch to look forward to.
Oh, Smarch! I think our audience love it when we talk about Smarch. And the lousy Smarch weather.
That's right.
How are you feeling?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
I had a little bit of the, congestional difficulties in my breathing ways and so forth last week, something you imparted to me.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you. Those who listen to the podcast regularly will know that last week you were saying something was going through your family, and you said, my family is sick.
Yeah.
And I impertinently interjected, of you, right?
Yeah, right.
Trying to be funny.
Yeah, I remember.
Normal.
Yeah.
And you said, maybe. Well, that's come back to bite me because just a day or two later, I got the same thing.
Yeah. I think that's called karma.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Salted karma. And it was pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
you sound good, though. You sound like you're on the other side of it.
On the other side of it, I still have some rumblings down, in the near the vocal folds. But we'll try to work them out.
Yes, well, I think that's where your friend Ken Tamplin could probably help you work out those vocal problems, right?
Maybe so. Maybe so.
To new listeners, just a little nod to
right.
one of our contributors who gives us the wonderful music.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today, Jeff? What is on the docket?
We are diving back into, I believe it's chapter 2 of the Golden Age of Classics by one Carl Richard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we're going to pick up where we left off and talk about how some more details about how early Americans kind of used and understood ancient Greece and Rome as a template for kind of understanding themselves.
That's right. The golden age of the classics in America. And the overarching thesis of the book, as I understand it, as it is a companion to his earlier fine book, The Founders in the Classics, is that some of the other scholars who deal with this material, they have adopted the thesis that the founding generation was really addicted to classical types and exemplars, but then there was a decline as you have the run-up to the Civil War in the 1860s.
Yeah.
And Richard is taking an opposite thesis.
Right.
There were some changes in emphases and perspectives, but in fact, this was, as the title indicates, the golden age of the classics. So
Yes.
a greater intensity of devotion to the world of Greece and Rome.
Yep.
Rather than a diminution.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, so far I'm persuaded.
Yes, I am too.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have any corregenda
Oh, thank goodness.
Yes.
Finally, 1 week.
weighing us down.
Right.
Let's be honest, like a pair of cement shoes.
Right. And what's our listener? That's always
Tom,
our gadfly.
the guy who lives rent free in my head. And now we can add Will to the mix.
So
and,
we got nothing for them to
no,
to bring up this
no.
week. Okay, all right.
And our super fan friend Suzanne.
Yeah.
I don't think she has sent in any corregenda. Maybe that's why she's our friend.
Maybe that's it.
But we do have an opening quote.
We do.
And so we're in chapter 2 of The Golden Age of the Classics in America, chapter 2 entitled Democracy. And we're on page 54. So,
Yes.
Jeff, I think you're going to read us a portion of that opening quote.
Yes, and so this comes from a subsection entitled The Continuing Appeal of Rome. And Richard writes, even as Greece advanced in the esteem of most Americans, Rome never lost its luster. On the contrary, men like George Frederick Holmes emphasized that the Roman reverence for law constituted a crucial check on Greek love of liberty. As much as Hugh Swinton Ligare loved Greek literature and art, he found it incredible that it originated in the wildest democracy that ever existed. A tumultuary, I love that. I've never seen that word, but I love it. A tumultuary and excitable mob, wayward, fitful, and refractory, alternately slave and tyrant, now a passive instrument of the demagogue, then like a devilish engine back recoiling upon the rash hand that aspired to direct it.
That's some good oratory there.
Man, they don't make them like that anymore.
Nice job, Legare.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting combination, right? And kind of a trope that you can still use today. The Romans are known for reverence for law, and the Greeks are known for love of liberty.
Right.
Now, like all tropes, you can push it too far. It probably breaks down at some point, because after all, the most famous Romans were the ones who were constantly imitating their Greek forebears.
Right. Right.
And so the love of liberty, at least, is something that they proclaimed just as fervently as the Greeks.
Yes.
But there is something different about the Greeks. There was no pure democracy in the Roman experience.
Right.
Just as the founders of this country never intended for there to be a pure democracy in our political system either. You know, they took a hard look at Greece and said, we're not going to make it like that.
Right.
Let's adopt a modified Roman system, the mixed constitution, but let's have just one executive, unlike the Roman system with two.
Exactly. You know, I've actually heard, I haven't heard it recently, but suggestions that with the rise of the internet and an ability to make our democracy more of a direct democracy, people can vote by.
You mean our republic?
Our republic by clicking on their phones.
Oh,
and so
we could have constant plebiscites.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
yeah.
What do you think of that?
I don't like it.
Yeah,
I don't like.
That's because you're an old fuddy-duddy doing a podcast
right.
on the classics.
Right. I'm a believer in that Republican style of government.
Representation.
Exactly.
So we can elect persons that we believe are more competent maybe or dedicated in certain ways, and then they can make some of the routine decisions for us.
Right.
But we can always yank the carpet out from underneath them and pull them back.
Yes, exactly.
We don't have to decide on every individual thing.
Right. And the idea that voting on every single thing, like who would, if to do that well, I mean, who has the time?
Yeah. No, there'd be a lot of people just phoning it in, frankly.
Exactly.
Right? Just make the decision without much forethought.
Right. And not to say that our
so different than how it's currently working.
well, yeah, not to say that our elected politicians aren't some of them aren't phoning it in.
Right.
But the ideal is that this is someone who will have the time dedicated to study things that perhaps we don't have the time to do. Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And of course, if you look at Athenian democracy, it had a number of constraints that don't match today's system at all. For example, Aristotle famously said in the Politics that the size of a democracy is limited to the space that will hold all of its voters at one time.
Right.
So where are we going to get that?
Yes.
Here in the state of Michigan, the so-called Big House in Ann Arbor, the large football stadium, what does that hold? 80,000?
No, it's 110.
110.
Yes.
So that's probably the biggest self-contained holding spot that you can find in the Midwest, maybe in the whole country. 100,000 people. But we have a country of 330 million. So if we were going to try to use Aristotle's norm without adapting it, 100,000 is the limit.
Well, the answer would be, we'll just put them all on a Zoom call. Is there a limit to how many people you can have on a Zoom call?
I think there is. I think there's a Zoom limit.
There might be.
Have you ever been on one of those? A really large Zoom call, Hollywood Squares?
It's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We may be digressing.
No, but I mean, just to speak to that, I was just talking in my art and archaeology class last week about some of the architecture in and around ancient Athens, and talking about the Pnyx, right?
Right.
So that's
the spot they assembled.
where the assembly, and we estimate that it could hold maybe about 6,000.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine the quote just here: the wildest democracy. Imagine trying to herd and speak to 6,000 people.
And that was a time when they didn't have tasers, right? So there was no way to put any kind of a restraint on the guy that got out of hand. Don't tase me, bro.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You couldn't do that.
Right. The closest that I love the detail is that it was a function of one of the slices of the slave population to walk with the rope with the wet paint through the agora to kind of herd you up onto the Pnyx, and so that if you got your ketones stained, then that
it means you had already voted.
It was a mark of shame because you were sluggish to get up there.
So you had to run. I've never heard this.
Yeah,
you had to run to try to escape the wet paint rope.
Right. So I mean, I love that detail.
I do too.
Because the shiny ideal is that these Greek democrats were just ready to run up to the Pnyx and take the reins of their own democracy. No, they had to be herded up there.
They were like people everywhere.
Right, exactly. That doesn't change. Yeah.
So tell the listeners, because this is fascinating, Jeff, what the word Pnyx means.
Pnyx means crowded.
Okay.
Yes, thick.
Right. All bunched up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went and voted in some primaries in August.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had the chance to do that.
I did not.
Yeah. And after I I finished voting, I took my daughter with me. She can't vote. Mm-hmm. Didn't stop her, but no, she didn't vote. But the poll workers were trying to indoctrinate her into democracy. Oh, someday you'll be here, and this is great, and you should vote. And I didn't try to stop them. She can think about those things on her own.
Right.
I was a little suspicious of it.
Yeah.
I'm just here to, be a citizen. Then they tried to give me one of those stickers at the end.
Well, they said, I voted?
Yeah.
Yeah. You didn't wear it proudly?
I didn't wear it at all. I refused it. I don't want to wear that little sticker around.
Yeah.
Do my fellow citizens really need that kind of bragging?
No.
For me to rub it in their face?
Yeah.
That's like the wet paint rope, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I have never worn one of those stickers either. I think I have a similar kind of reaction to that. And
to groupthink.
And when I see someone wearing the sticker, I always have kind of like a...
okay, congratulations. You voted. Now, we're off.
It's okay.
Off topic.
It's okay.
But you've run a marathon before.
2.
Right.
Yes.
So you'll have the 26.2 thing on the back window of your vehicle.
I don't do that.
Never?
Either. No. I think that's...
Okay.
I think that's... It's kind of ridiculously self-congratulatory.
But that's a real accomplishment.
Yeah, so what?
I think it's a real accomplishment. But I compare that to the voting sticker. Nah.
Yeah.
You have to go much higher. All right. So that's Hugh Swinton Ligare. We have, once again, Athenian liberty as opposed to Roman order and commitment to the rule of law.
Yeah.
But where does the argument go on from there?
Well, it goes on to American admiration for Roman military virtue.
Okay.
And one of the things that struck me as I was reading this is that seems to be a lot more admiration for figures like Cincinnatus and such, and not
Camillus,
not a lot of talk of the Greek side of things, like Miltiades. And it struck
Alexander.
It struck me as, if you think about the underdog Greeks beating back the Persians, seems like a much better corollary for like the American Revolutionary than would kind of the behemoth of Rome.
Right.
And so it just struck me. I wonder why the one gets more play than the other.
Well, especially because, Rome turned into an empire that in later times, many, like Tacitus, saw as ridiculously oppressive of indigenous people. So wouldn't they compare that to, say, Great Britain? Right.
Yeah.
And they were the scrappy colonials beating their way out of that.
Right.
I think the key lies in the influence of Stoicism. Right.
Explain that.
Well, that the Romans, though not explicitly, but certainly in general terms, were very stoic. And some of their leading statesmen, Cato, Seneca, Cicero, the orator, these are men who actively cultivated a stoic persona. Mm-hmm. There's a certain amount of self-discipline, sobriety, sexual mores that were a part of Stoicism that didn't fit real well with the Greeks. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think Americans are much more comfortable imitating the Stoic heroism of some of these Roman generals than comparing themselves to, say, Philip or Alexander,
Right.
who lived kind of wild lives.
Yes.
Apart from their military conquests, or Epaminondas, right, or the Thebans. You can't really. They're not really going to compare themselves to those guys.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I think you're right in terms of like the Stoic, in terms of like temperament, or that the way that I think that the ideal, the way Americans like to see themselves,
Correct.
fits more with that kind of that Roman ideal than the Greeks.
Definitely.
I was thinking
but
more,
we did see last time, if I may interrupt,
Please.
that within 20 days of the Alamo, right, there were, this was 1836, individuals comparing Colonel William Travis to Leonidas
right,
and others.
Yep.
So there's that moment, but your larger point obviously stands that there's not a lot of comparison to Greek exploits.
Exactly. So I was like the figure that I was thinking of is like a Miltiades at Marathon.
Yeah.
Right. And in seeing him as a template for some of these maybe unlikely victories against the more organized British forces in the Revolutionary War, it struck me that would seem like a natural corollary. But here we are. So you want to read us a little bit?
Yes, I'd like to. So this is pages 54 and following, before we get on to the really interesting topic of women in democracy. And these are little vignettes of how, as Richard says, the Romans were admired for their military prowess as well as for their republican government. While serving as the United States' first minister to Russia in 1812, John Quincy Adams wrote to his mother from St. Petersburg, ascribing both the Russian victory over Napoleon that year and the American victory in the Revolutionary War to guerrilla tactics that had originated with the Roman general Fabius, tactics that had depleted Hannibal's force. So this is Quintus Fabius Maximus, who got the nickname Cunctator, Slowpoke.
That's right.
Because he took his time and delayed when it came to engaging Hannibal.
Right.
Developed these guerrilla tactics. So Adams, right, steeped in his classical history, says, that's just how we win, and that's just how the British, right, it's just how Napoleon was defeated by the Russians.
Right.
And then he mentions William Henry Harrison. The same year, says Richard, William Henry Harrison, already the hero of Tippecanoe, offered to place his troops under the command of Governor Isaac Shelby of Kentucky, noting, quote, Scipio, the conqueror of Carthage, did not disdain to act as a lieutenant of his younger and less experienced brother Lucius. That's a pretty deep allusion.
That is.
Don't you think?
That's a deep cut there.
As the kids would say.
Yeah.
But Adams, he never held back when it came to showing off his learning.
Right. Yeah. Well, wasn't that was in William Henry Harrison that we talked about, that was he was showing off too much during his inaugural address that he caught cold and
That's
died.
right. 17 Roman consuls or something like that.
That's right.
In the inaugural address.
Right.
And then we move on to another one, and that is the admirers. This is page 55. Says Richard, quote, the admirers of John C. Calhoun praised him by comparing him to various Roman heroes. The Charleston Mercury called him as pure a patriot as ever bore a Grecian or Roman name. So I guess, Jeff, in terms of our conversation about Roman law versus Greek liberty, patriotism is the uniting thread between the two.
Okay.
So Greek patriotism maybe expressed itself in love of liberty. The Americans of this period would say Roman patriotism expressed itself in love of law and order.
Yeah, I can see that. Right. The immediate counter that pops into mind is Pericles.
Yeah.
In his funeral oration. I think that came up last time.
Yes, because it was the model for Lincoln at Gettysburg.
That's right.
The funeral speech in Thucydides, as opposed to Everett, right, who had the really, really long,
like the 2.5 hour speech.
Yes, that had endless classical allusions, but wasn't really based on any kind of classical spirit.
Right.
In the way that Lincoln's short Gettysburg address was.
Right. So I get, but Pericles as especially the funeral oration as an idealization of love of country,
right,
love of city state,
right,
and love of their democratic system.
Yeah,
it kind of strikes me as that there was a missed opportunity here.
Yes,
yeah.
But I think that Americans at the time, as this book bears out, and maybe even still today, anytime it's kind of a new project, right? And America's not even 75 years old at this point.
Right.
There's the hopes that we're going to correct all the mistakes of the past and avoid the particular pitfalls.
Yes.
So we don't have to be obsessively devoted to Greek liberty at the expense of law And we don't have to be excessively devoted to law like the Romans were.
Yes.
At the expense of liberty, we'll get it right.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And it remains to be seen, I would say.
Yeah. All right, Dave. Let's wrap up this section on the continuing appeal of Rome and get into the role of women in a democratic society, but a bit from the end of that, that passage.
So this is bottom of 55, top of 56. Like the founders, antebellum Americans invoked Carthage, Rome's nemesis, far less frequently than Greece or Rome. However, one famous instance occurred in 1850, when the normally moderate Senator Robert Toombs of Georgia, the future Confederate Secretary of State, became agitated over northern talk of excluding slavery from the new territories acquired in the Mexican War. Toombs declared on the Senate floor, quote, "Deprive us of this right and appropriate the common property to yourselves. It is then your government, not mine. Then I am its enemy, and I will then, if I can, bring my children and my constituents to the altar of liberty, and like Hamilcar, I would swear them to eternal hostility to your foul domination," end quote. Says Richard, this was a reference to the Greek historian Polybius's account, History's Book 3, of the occasion when Hamilcar Barca, Carthage's greatest general in the First Punic War, made his 9-year-old son Hannibal swear on an altar to Baal that he would oppose Rome his whole life. Hannibal, Carthage's greatest general of the Second Punic War, was true to his vow.
So you have here a southerner.
That's right.
Kind of
Robert Toombs.
Invoking the enemy of Rome.
That's right.
To say that if you allow this to happen, this is what it's going to be like.
If you don't allow us to extend slavery into the territories conquered during the Mexican War, I'm going to go all Hannibal on you.
Yes, exactly.
And I and all my constituents will swear, Will swear eternal hostility to your foul domination.
Right.
It's actually what happened.
Yeah. That's exactly
what's
happened.
so crazy about it.
Yeah.
And the enormous bloodshed in the American Civil War.
Yeah.
Some 600,000. Well, moving on from that.
Let's move on to our next section.
The next section, the role of women in a democratic society. And Jeff, can you set us up for this with maybe a quote?
Yeah. I'll start right at the beginning of that section. Most American Democrats no more envisioned political equality for women than had Athenian Democrats or Roman Republicans. Like the founders, most antebellum Americans considered Cornelia, the mother of Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, the Gracchi, the model of Republican motherhood because of her virtue and her single-minded devotion to her children. Cornelia, the widowed daughter of the great general Scipio Africanus, had even rejected the marriage proposals of kings so that she might focus her energy completely on raising virtuous sons.
Now, do you remember, Jeff, if I may interrupt, the first time you encountered the characters of the Gracchi in your studies of the classics?
I remember them encountering them in, I think it was in a broad history survey as a freshman in college. And it was covered in about 7 minutes.
Was this Bert DeVries?
It was Doug Howard.
Oh, interesting.
Remember Doug?
Yes, I do. I remember him well.
Yep.
Very knowledgeable man.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the first time I encountered them was in a readings on Latin literature led by George Harris.
Oh, yeah.
I wish I could remember the name of the book. It was gray with a red. We've talked about it on the podcast.
Oh, I can
before.
picture it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was so interesting because the Gracchi, separated by about 10 years, tried the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I got the impression that the way the story was usually told about the brothers Gracchi and the way that I then heard it retold in graduate school was that these guys were populist heroes who were crushed by the, old stodgy constitutionalists who wanted to retain power illegitimately.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've never known since that time, is that accurate? What exactly was happening? Which side would I have been on?
Right.
Because I do believe that a large part of the role of government is to defend private property.
Mm-hmm.
I really firmly hold that. It's a traditionalist view. But I'm wondering, is that what the Gracchi were after, or how do we understand that?
Yeah, but I wish I need to refresh myself on the whole situation. I mean, I think people tend to kind of interpret these things through their own kind of contemporary lenses, right? And I think many people often kind of misread these figures by seeing things that aren't really there. But,
I know that's a little bit outside of what we're talking about today, but I thought it would help set up a little bit who the Gracchi are.
Right.
And then, of course, what was it? Some 60, 70 years later, Julius Caesar tried to finish what they started.
Yes.
And make Rome into allegedly a far more democratic and equal society. That's how the story is often told.
Right. Right. But we're talking here about Cornelia.
Yes.
As
way to bring me back.
As a model for a Roman model for how women should American women should be. Right. Yeah.
So what else does Richard say?
Richard goes on. According to Plutarch, when a frivolous lady asked to see Cornelia's jewels, she presented her sons.
Clever.
She always had them with her.
I guess
ready
so.
to just kind of whip out and
kept them hung around her neck or something.
So Senator Robert Y. Hayne of South Carolina once declared, Virginia, like the mother of the Gracchi, when asked for her jewels, points to her sons. In 1819, Ladies Magazine, published in Savannah, declared that the story of Cornelia and her jewels was an object lesson for women. Quote, in a republic like this, teaching frugality as well as motherhood. It was necessary for Ladies Magazine to highlight the tale's lesson in frugality, since the images of the story, often emblazoned on silk embroideries and other luxury items, had ironically become a popular commercial vehicle in his address. Popular commercial vehicle. In his address at the opening of the Female High and Normal School in Charleston in 1859, was your school high and normal?
No, it was low and weird.
It was low and weird, yeah. C.G. Meminger contended, it is therefore obvious that the real destinies of the child are chiefly in the hands of the mother, and that its future usefulness and virtue are, under God, mainly dependent upon her training. The history of the world has demonstrated this great truth. From the record of Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi, down to the mother of our own Washington, the evidence is uniform and convincing. All right.
So if you want to be a good American woman, according to the thinking at the time, you emulate Cornelia, the daughter of Scipio Africanus and the mother of the brothers Gracchi,
right?
Who was an aristocrat and yet somehow trained her sons in the art of political maneuvering.
Yes.
To try to keep the republic going, but also, I guess, contend against the aristocratic elite.
Right. To give a voice to the
downtrodden.
The downtrodden, exactly.
Yes, he was a tribune of the plebs, if I'm not mistaken, a tribunus plebis.
Yep.
So Richard goes on. A writer for the New York Herald claimed concerning John C. Calhoun's wife, Floride, she governs her household in a style that no Roman matron in the old times ever surpassed. Cornelia, the daughter at home, is a most affectionate companion for the mother. Through his sly reference to Cornelia, Floride's daughter, the author suggested to the reader that there were two Cornelias in the Calhoun household, one who modeled herself upon the Roman matron and another who was named after her. Those clever guys.
So they are very, very clever. Right, so the role of the American woman is to raise virtuous sons.
Yes.
Right? That's how you're going to contribute to the future greatness of this new country.
That's right. However, Richard does draw a certain irony out of this.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm talking about this character, Louisa McCord, that Richard mentions on page 57. She was the South's foremost proponent of the doctrine, says Richard, that women were inherently suited to the domestic life. And Richard tells us that she wrote a play called Gaius Gracchus. This was 1851, based it on Plutarch's biographies of Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. And in the play, she represents the ideal Republican woman as Cornelia. Jeff, can you read a little bit of the poetry here from this play written by this woman, Louisa McCord, written in English and very popular in the antebellum South?
Sure. So in the play, Cornelia is talking to her daughter-in-law, Licinia, and she says,
right.
Nay, stay within doors, daughter. 'Tis the place most meet and fitting, woman. A quiet comeliness is there, becomes a woman's greetings. And believe me, dear, however daring, bold himself may be, a man never loves within a woman's eye to see the mimic of his conduct glassed. 'Tis meek endurance, quiet fortitude that make her life and beauty. We may rear heroes whose dauntless acts will shake the world, which shall shake the world, or like a moral atlas bear its burden, a universe of care upon their shoulders. But in our bosoms, if too fierce the flame that feeds such spirits struggles, we must check, or drive it back at least to seeming quiet. If hard the effort, it is woman's task. Her passions, if not smothered, must be hid, till in their faintly beating pulse herself will scarcely know her blood the same which bounds through manlier veins unchecked.
Interesting.
And then Licinia confesses,
okay,
if I were a man with a man's soul and not the coward nature modeled me. Right? I'm guessing that this would
not go over well today. No, probably not.
This would definitely ruffle feathers.
Definitely, but it's a picture of the thinking of the time.
Yep.
And I really like the conclusion that Richard draws here. He says the role of the Republican mother was to exhort her sons to patriotic activity, but not to participate in such, quote, manly action herself. McCord's play received rave reviews, says Richard. Ironically, this is the part, Jeff, that gets me. Debau's review, that's a famous reviewer of plays, ascribed her success to the same masculine qualities McCord disdained in women. The reviewer exulted, quote, she is wholly unlike any of her sisters of the lyre, and writes with a terseness, vigor, earnestness, and masculine energy, which shows her altogether of a different order. Her acquaintance with the poets of Greece and Rome in their own language has enabled her to impart to her tragedy a purely classical tone, which no unlearned writer could have given.
So what makes her great is how manly she is.
writes like a man. Isn't that strange?
That is.
I guess people are just, maybe they're not anymore, but at the time, they were deeply confused about some of these things.
Yeah.
So the proper role for a woman, said McCord, is to stay out of the limelight and to act like a woman according to how she defined it.
Right.
But then the play is praised because it sounds like it was written by a man.
Right. But
strange.
I mean, there's kind of another layer of irony too, is that would McCord advise her daughters that if you've got a play and you write that play and have it produced and bring it to the people, or is that unwomanly?
I don't know.
Yeah,
you'd have to ask McCord.
Yeah, or the reviewer of in Debau's.
Debau, right? So do we want to say anything more on this topic of women in democracy? A few more bon mots before we move on to the lingering specter of Caesar?
Yeah, I thought this bit that was interesting, talking about how McCord received a classical education herself, which I thought was really quite interesting.
Is this the bottom of 58?
Yes.
Can you share some of that?
Sure. Which reads, as the critic for Debau's review guessed, McCord's classical education went beyond even that offered at most of the new female academies. So I think in one of our early episodes in this, we talked about how there was a movement
absolutely
to provide women with a similar kind of classical education as the men were getting.
And other typically disenfranchised groups.
Yes. Yep. As a child, she had possessed such a passion for learning that she hid behind a door and took notes while a tutor taught her brothers. When she was caught, her father, Langdon Cheves, said that anyone so desirous of learning should have it, and she was giving a thorough training in classics and mathematics. So then a little bit more. McCord's opposition to a direct political role for women was particularly striking, given her advocacy of such a role for lower-class white males. Her father, who served as president of the National Bank, Attorney General of South Carolina, and Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, was a self-made man and a powerful orator whose thundering speeches reminded Washington Irving of Cicero and Demosthenes. So there's a disconnect between
definitely
herself kind of being a self-starter, kind of demanding an education that perhaps wasn't available to me.
Educate me like the boys. I deserve it. I want it.
Right, and then she had a model of a father who was a self-made man, and again, went up the ladder. But in her philosophy, or at least in her plays, her argument was that that's not a place for a woman. Yeah.
And Jeff, speaking of the rampant inconsistency that runs through the heart of all mortals,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
Let's do it. This episode of Ad Nauseam is brought to you by Hackett Publishing. Hackett Publishing, they've got offices in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Cambridge, Massachusetts.
That's right.
They've been with us. We were just talking early on the podcast about it's been 4 years.
That's right.
And they've been with us about 4 years.
That's right.
And they took a chance on this little podcast, and they stuck with us. They are, I think we're of the same mind. We are dedicated to keeping the flame of the classics alive.
Don't curse the darkness. Light a candle.
Light a candle.
And read a book.
And the way Hackett does it is by providing high-quality translations and texts from all corners of academia, but especially the classics.
That's right.
Multiple translations of similar works, and they do it in an affordable, attractive manner. Mm-hmm. And so they thread a needle in the way that I think few companies do.
That's a good point. Yep. There are other purveyors of classics books. Some of them are handsome volumes, high quality, but also enormous price.
Yes.
Others are, I would say, low quality and not well made. We won't mention any names. But yeah, like you said, Hackett has hit that sweet spot.
Yep.
So last week's episode, we interviewed Diane Arnson-Sfarlin, translator of Aristophanes. We made it through a whole podcast episode, if I remember, keeping it fairly PG for our family-friendly audience.
Not easy when you're talking about Aristophanes.
No, even though we're talking about Aristophanes, and we have that giveaway. And so we hope people will go and check that out. Maybe not for the kiddos, but some great stuff. And that's just one of many, many titles that Hackett offers. You've got the Ovid Metamorphoses by Stan Lombardo. I know you're especially fond of the what is it? The moonshot cover of the Odyssey?
And the D-Day cover for the Iliad.
That's right, also by Stan.
My all-time favorite is the picture of Elvis Presley in the front of the Bacchae.
Yes.
Great, yep.
Great stuff.
And there was a wonderful witty cover on the cover of Diane's new book.
That's right.
So it's great. And so, yeah, I mean, you're gonna want to enter for the giveaway. But even if you for whatever reason you can't, go to Hackett. It's not going to break the bank.
No.
You're going to find great works for an affordable price.
Some of them under $10.
Yes, a lot of them under $10. So go to Hackett Publishing, HACKETT Publishing.com. Check out their wide variety. Put a few books into your little satchel there.
Right.
And then type in this coupon code. Dave, what's the coupon code
It
for
is
Hackett?
AN, as in ad nauseum, and then the current year, which, if memory serves, is 2024.
That is correct.
So AN 2024, and I think that gets them what? Does that get them like an additional $5 charge and double the shipping?
Actually, a lot better than
Oh,
that.
really?
Yes, it'll get them 20% off your entire order and free shipping.
I would like to see some of these other river-based book emporia match that.
Indeed.
Like Nile.com or Blue Danube.
That's right. No,
They're not giving that away.
no way. Yeah, so check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the good folks at Ratio Coffee. Jeff, tell me about your MR.
My MR?
Yeah, your morning ritual.
My morning ritual.
What does it entail?
Well, what I do is it's
skip the part about putting on your socks. I mean, get down to the kitchen.
Okay, gotcha. Right. So when I come down in the morning, I find that my tank has been pre-filled the night before, and I load the grounds into my metal cone. I put the carafe in place, and I hit the button, and it hits the bloom stage.
Is it the kind of thing where you have a key and Beck has a key, and you insert the key at the same time, and you have to turn it in sync, and then say some kind of a ritual or some kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A charm or incantation to get the thing to work?
Or like to know the nuclear codes to launch an initial strike?
That's right.
Right. No, it's very simple. There's no words, there's no ritual, there's no key. There's just one button.
That's
you
it.
Push it, and within 5 minutes, I've got a perfectly brewed cup, a carafe filled with coffee that stays hot for hours.
So how does the ratio do it? What's the secret?
The secret, I think, is the bloom stage.
Tell us more.
That off gases all that nasty CO2, and then that 200-degree water comes piping through the metallic veins, and
down through some kind of a head.
Yes, what's it called? The Fibonacci.
Fibonacci. It's a geometrical pattern
for
the disbursement of water.
Right, and it pours over my grounds. It makes a wonderful kind of hissing, bubbling sound. That's a great way to wake up.
Aromatic, you'd say?
Aromatic, and the smell of the coffee drifts through the household.
Now, do you have to stay there and pay attention the whole time, or can you wander around the kitchen making bacon and eggs and so forth?
I'm wandering around. I'm cleaning up. I'm taking the dog out.
Scraping the oatmeal off the bottom of the pan.
Exactly. There's all kinds of things you can get done.
Okay.
And then before you know it, you turn around, it's done, ready to go.
Wow.
Yep.
Sounds pretty simple.
Do you have a similar routine?
I have a very similar routine, but I usually squeeze in a little bit of egg making in between.
Gotcha.
I can get most of my omelet done. I have it timed pretty well.
Nice.
Most of my omelet done before the ratio 8 finishes up.
Excellent.
So we got the 8.
Yep.
You were formerly a user of the 6, the little brother. Also a fine machine.
Loved it. Yep.
A little more attainable price point.
That's right.
That's what they like to say. Available in 3 colors. The 6. The 8 is in a wide variety of finishes. You've got the stainless steel.
Stainless steel. You have the oyster finish.
That's correct, with the walnut touches. But coming along soon is the Ratio 4. In fact, I think they're going to ship this month.
Fantastic.
I'm an early adopter, so I got a notice in my email inbox that they're on their way. So what do you know about the 4, Jeff?
The 4 is even more affordable than the 6. It is an affordable, a beautiful half batch pour over coffee machine. It's the smallest brewer yet from Ratio. Agile, sleek, puts out between 5 and 20 ounces of coffee per batch, enough for 1 or 2 reasonably sized cups or 1 big travel mug. Now, I have to think that you're the only coffee drinker in your house.
Presently, yes.
Right, and so it seems like this would be perfect.
I think so. I'm really eager to see what's going to happen. Maybe I'll take the 8 and repurpose it somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I think I'm going to be using primarily the 4. Because one of the things that can happen when you have a great coffee machine like this is you can inadvertently drink too much.
Yeah, that is true.
You don't want to drink too much coffee. I know some people who are listening might say, you can never have too much coffee. But wait till you're our age, right?
Exactly.
It is possible to overdo it.
So in those mornings where if I don't have some place that I need to be fairly early, I will just sit around and I will
drink a whole pot.
Drain that carafe.
Yeah, it's delicious. It's great. So I think the 4 might hit the sweet spot, and we're not going to have any of those little throwaway plastic cups, the marsupods that Gurik offers.
No.
This is going to be a great cup of coffee.
Great cup of coffee. And it comes high quality, and the same kind of thing that you're going to get from the 8 and the 6, but just on a smaller scale.
And a 5-year warranty.
Yep.
So if you want to cash in on this, listener, and also support our podcast, please go to ratiocoffee.com. Look, it's got a Latin name, RATIO coffee.com. Check out their wide selection of offerings, and then enter this coupon code for the month of October. What is it, Jeff?
ANCOX5. Right. And Dave, what does the X stand for?
The X stands for Xenophanes. The pre-Socratic philosopher,
yes,
who said that if horses and donkeys had gods, they would look like coffee machines.
I remember that passage.
Yeah,
yes.
True story. Again, the coupon code is ANCOX5,
and that will get you 15% off your entire order.
That's right. Check it out. All right, Jeff, as we get back into it, I understand you want to say a little bit more about the role of women in a democratic society before we move on to Julius Caesar and his specter. Is that right?
Yeah. I wanted to mention this woman, Margaret Baird Smith, I think, who kind of serves as a counterexample to McCord. So
all right.
if McCord saw the role of women as being, playing behind the scenes, raising virtuous sons, and don't stick your neck out into the realm of men.
Seen but not heard.
Yeah, Baird Smith had a slightly different approach.
Okay.
And this is on page 61, where Richard writes, Margaret Baird Smith emphasized the intellectual attributes of Roman women. In a series of short stories for Ladies Magazine in the early 1830s, Smith made an implicit analogy between Roman matrons and the classically educated women of her day. She noted the social circles of Rome, at least those of the higher class, are always composed of both sexes. Virtuous and learned women mingled with statesmen and philosophers and imparted to society that refinement which they alone can impart. They had ceased to be the slaves and had become friends and companions of men. Considering, quote, the epithet of Roman matron is a title of honor, Smith applauded the superior selflessness of matrons who had sacrificed for their country without the hope of glory that animated their male counterparts. She wrote concerning the men, allowing, however, the devotedness and fortitude of these heroes to be greater than that of the Roman matron, were not their supports greater? Were they not more than rewarded for temporary pain by immortal glory? So maybe not, a full counterpart to McCord, but
no, it's not 21st century feminism.
Of course not. But I mean, she was making the point that women have an intellectual place right alongside statesmen and philosophers, that they belong there, not just simply kind of working quietly behind the scenes.
Right.
Yep.
Something that some people may not expect to find in 1830s America.
Right.
But there it is. Okay, so now we have the lingering specter of Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. This is page 62 and following. Says Richard, Americans plumbed classical political history for villains as well as for heroes and heroines. Like the founders, antebellum Americans' greatest villain was Julius Caesar, since they held him most responsible for the fall of the revered Roman Republic. Just as Jefferson and Hamilton had accused each other of being a Caesar, Caesars everywhere, I guess. Mm-hmm. So antebellum political leaders accused one another of similar conspiracies against the Republic. When New England Federalists spoke of secession before the War of 1812, John Quincy Adams categorized them as mini-Caesars, writing, quote, "To rise upon a division system is, unfortunately, one of the most obvious and apparently easy courses which plays before the eyes of individual ambition in every section of the Union. It is the natural resource of all the small statesmen who, feeling like Caesar, and finding that Rome is too large an object for their grasp, would strike off a village where they might aspire to the first station without exposing themselves to derision," end quote. Later, during his own administration, it was probably also Adams who wrote a series of essays under the pseudonym Patrick Henry, suggesting that John C. Calhoun was another Caesar. Patrick Henry, that is, under the pseudonym, wrote, "An affected moderation is often the clearest indicium of aspiring designs." Now I have to interrupt here.
Okay.
Anybody who uses the word indicium of aspiring designs might have a little bit of affectation.
It's a little much.
Of their own.
Yeah.
And affected moderation. Anyway, Julius Caesar thrice refused the kingly crown. Both Octavius and Tiberius assumed it with violent reluctance, and Oliver Cromwell struggled hard with the Lord before he could be persuaded to subvert the liberties of England.
So he's suspicious of kind of a false...
Yes.
A
you
false,
protest too much.
You protest too much, right. Yeah, right. So I think it's interesting. So Caesar, I think it makes sense. So Caesar as the one who finally brings down the Republic.
Yes,
is the mustache twirling villain in all of this, right?
Although, as I learned it in grad school from many of my professors, maybe you learned something similar. What I learned was Caesar did not bring down the Republic. Caesar outcompeted the other aristocrats to be the one aristocrat who's in charge.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I adopt this. I don't know what to think. But the story told at the time was the traditional understanding of Republic becoming an empire and Caesar being perpetual dictator. That needs to be revised because it's simplistic. At the time of Caesar's assassination in 44, there were 24 patrician families competing for the same crown.
Yes.
And there was really no participation in government by the common citizen.
Exactly.
And so all Caesar did was outcompete the other aristocrats.
Right.
He didn't really turn it into a dictatorship. I don't know what to think.
Right. No, I think you could make the argument that by the time Caesar is assassinated, the Republic had really ceased to function as a republic for many, many years. Right. So
I think that's what Ed Watts would say.
Yeah, and I think that if not Caesar, some other Marius or Sulla would have come along and done the same kind of thing. He was the
Lepidus wanted to do it apparently in the second triumvirate.
Right. So maybe he just becomes the face of, and I think the finality of his murder. Right. And then the civil war that was triggered. It's very easy to kind of see that as the locus or the hinge point on which everything turns.
Right.
When in fact this stuff had been in motion for many, many years.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I guess it was my advisor and mentor, the late Mentrix, the late Karen Green, who liked to say, Brutus and Cassius, after Caesar's assassination, they had no plan at all of what to do next.
Right.
It was just, if we kill him, then everything is going to fix itself of its own accord. We'll go back to the old patterns, and that couldn't happen.
Right. And I think you were saying earlier in the show about how there's this American ideal is that we can take the mistakes of the ancients and we can fix them.
Right.
We can. The American experiment is going to be filling in all of those gaps.
Yes.
And I think that's very, very true here is that where Brutus et al. Were not welcomed as heroes. Right. I forget which ancient historian is, but as they're kind of running through the street with their bloody daggers, the people kind of hide in their houses and shut the doors. And they were expecting people to kind of come out and say, finally, we're free of the tyrant. And it didn't happen.
No.
And so
because Caesar's popularity was so enormous.
Right. And it seems like the American idea is that, well, we're going to flip that. Caesar was really the villain, and we're going to elevate we're going to make ourselves into a Brutus that is actually properly celebrated.
Right.
But once again, I think we'll get down to like John Wilkes Booth completely misreading the situation. Yeah.
I'm really interested in what James Monroe says next. An oft ignored founder, I suppose. He's at the bottom of page 62. Could you read a little bit of that, please?
Yes. So James Monroe invoked the specter of Caesar at the Virginia Constitutional Convention in 1830 in an effort to prevent the popular election of the state's governor. Monroe declared, "If we look to history on this subject, we see the demonstration that the more you connect the people with the executive and the greater you make his power, the greater is the danger to republican government. What overthrew the ancient republics? Go to Rome, and what do you find there? Was it not their own consuls, whom they themselves had chosen, that overthrew the liberties of the state? Marius and Sulla, Pompey and Caesar, till Caesar made himself a despot? It was the people who elected him, and they stuck to him in their own destruction. The republic was broken up into parties. Their contentions were pushed to extremes, and ruin was the consequence. Self-government depends for its success on keeping the people in a state of calmness. The less you give them to do in exercising their executive privilege, the safer they will be."
What do you think?
That's really interesting.
It certainly isn't democratic.
No.
And this is not democracy. It's quite different. So what do you think, Jeff?
What? Go to Rome, and what do you find there? Was it not their own consuls whom they themselves had chosen that overthrew the liberties of the state? So he's saying that the seeds of destruction were chosen by the
Absolutely.
people. Yes. Yeah. I don't know.
Do you have any of that populism coursing through your veins? You like that idea of whatever the people say is right, and we need to survey kind of the lowest common denominator, whatever that is?
No, I have very little of that.
Really?
Right. So I mean, I'm drawn to the idea that pure democracy is it's just 51. It's mob rule, right?
Okay.
51%.
So you don't want that.
It's the 51% deciding what's right for the other 49.
Right.
No, I don't want that.
So in our current political climate, we have this presidential election coming up in the United States in about a month, I guess. A lot of the criticisms of the Republican candidate, the former president, are that he is a populist and appeals to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
I'm not saying whether I share or disagree with that characterization, but that's one that I hear. What I don't find, though, is that that criticism is applied equally, because it seems to me that both parties are strongly arguing for a kind of populism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
It's a great embrace of democracy. You don't hear people saying the republic is threatened.
Right.
That has kind of, I don't know, it has elitist overtones. But to say democracy is threatened, I think that sells a lot better.
Yeah.
I don't think James Monroe would have gone for it.
No. I'm usually kind of a pox on both their houses kind of guy. But I found that in these election cycles, it's usually a couple of elites trying to portray themselves as regular class people, right? Ivy League grads who are going down to the local diner. I have a hard time.
That doesn't sell well in the Winkle household.
No, at least not to me.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Don't like it.
So who received the most frequent comparisons to Julius Caesar?
This a president that, as I was reading this, I realized that I need to read more, know more about him. But Andrew Jackson.
Yes, the Aquanet guy, as we established 2 episodes ago.
I mean, how much oat milk
would it take to coif that?
I don't know. Right?
So what does Richard say about Andrew Jackson? Why does it lead you to think you need to read more about him?
Yeah, well, I mean, he sounds like the little bit I know about him is a fascinating,
wild guy.
Wild guy, exactly. Richard writes, the American most frequently compared to Caesar was Andrew Jackson. Jackson's numerous political opponents frequently made the comparison, both publicly and privately, noting that both Caesar and Jackson were generals who were extremely popular with the masses. As early as 1818, while Speaker of the House, Henry Clay recommended Jackson's censure for the general's unauthorized invasion of Florida. At that time, Clay declared, "Remember that Greece had her Alexander, Rome had her Caesar, England her Cromwell, France her Bonaparte, and that if we would escape the rock on which they split, we must avoid their errors. In the provinces were laid the abuses and seeds of the ambitious projects which overturned the liberties of Rome."
Well said, Clay.
So there we have, again, 3 comparisons, not just Caesar, but seeing Jackson as Alexander, Oliver Cromwell, and Napoleon at the same time.
Yeah.
Right.
And Richard goes on, after losing the election of 1828 to Jackson, again, John Quincy Adams, immersed himself in Cicero's Philippics against Mark Antony, noting in his diary its, quote, melancholy interest as a record of the expiring agonies of Roman liberty. So John Quincy Adams in 1828 already believed the American experiment was potentially over.
Right.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
It's proved much more flexible, I guess, than Adams anticipated.
I find these kinds of deals actually quite comforting, right?
Really?
So I think when you hear the despair that everything's falling apart and the country has never been more divided, I don't think that's true.
I don't know.
Right? I was just reading.
I think you're probably right.
One of the books I'm reading right now is a book called American Heiress about Patty Hearst.
Oh.
And her, the kidnapping.
It was a newspaper heiress?
Right. And so she was kidnapped by this ridiculous terrorist group and Stockholm Syndrome and got involved.
Oh, right. And she eventually sympathized with her abductors?
Exactly, and was kind of on the lam with them for over a year. It's a fascinating story, but on the first page of the book, the author outlines some stats about saying like in 1973, there were something like 2,600 bombings in America. And so when I hear people, despairing about how violent and awful things are right now, well, there's a lot of comparanda that say, I mean, it's kind of sad comparanda that it's kind of always been this way.
There's that affected moderation, Winkle. You're using words like comparanda. What are you, John Quincy Adams?
JQA?
Yeah, an indicium of aspiring designs.
Right. Well, but then also, you hear people wish that politicians didn't get so vicious with one another.
Oh, this is nothing.
This is nothing.
They were shooting each other.
Exactly. This is nothing.
My complaint is not that they're vicious. It's that they're not vicious about the right things.
Well said.
That's my complaint.
Right.
Is this podcast about the airing of our complaints?
The airing of grievances?
Yeah, I think it is.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Jeff, we have a little more ground to cover here on the lingering specter of Caesar.
Right.
Before we have to cruise to the end of this episode and leave the remainder of the chapter to the avid reader.
We haven't gotten as far as we'd hoped.
What?
It's shocking.
Shocking.
Right.
So I want to look at the top of page 65 because it's eerily familiar.
Okay.
So Richard says, Calhoun's speech, this would be John C. Calhoun, portraying Jackson as an American Caesar was so compelling that the Washington Globe blamed it for the first presidential assassination attempt in American history. Richard Lawrence's unsuccessful effort to shoot Jackson. Regarding Lawrence, an anonymous writer for the Globe insinuated, whether he has become infatuated with the chimeras which have troubled the brains of the disappointed orators who have depicted the president as a Caesar who ought to have a Brutus, as a Cromwell, a Nero, a Tiberius, we know not. The author who singled out Calhoun for blame was wrong about Lawrence, a delusional house painter who had probably sniffed too much lead paint.
My goodness.
Richard's being funny, isn't he?
I think so.
Nevertheless, it was probably no accident, says Richard, that the first successful presidential assassin, John Wilkes Booth, the son and brother of men named Junius Brutus Booth, after the ancestor of Caesar's assassin who drove Tarquin, the corrupt king, from Rome, allegedly shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus be it ever for tyrants, after killing Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
The state motto of Virginia both reflected and reinforced the Republican fear of tyrants. Booth and two of his brothers had appeared in a stage production of William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in New York City less than 5 months before Lincoln's assassination.
Yeah. There's it's fascinating. Yeah.
It is.
Have you ever read the book American Brutus? About
no, but I think the last time we talked about this, you asked if I had read that book.
Did I bring that? Have I brought that up before?
You did, and I think your goal is really to make me feel bad because I haven't completed my reading assignments.
Right. Well, that's not my my goal here.
Well, mission accomplished.
But it's a fantastic book.
Who is the author of American Brutus?
Of course, now I'm blanking. It's been.
Why didn't they name it Brutus Americanus?
But they didn't want to be too affected. Right,
Okay.
Right. But I mean, there's an added detail that I'm remembering is that Lincoln himself attended one of these performances of Julius Caesar, and
with Booth and
kind of walked away commenting that Booth, he said that actor was, I think he said that was looking rather sharp at me. And so one of these things details that's kind of presaging, of course, what indeed happened. But Wilkes Booth was filled with all kinds of delusions of grandeur,
he was.
Right? And
he had been sniffing too much lead paint,
something like that. And I think he took the fact that his father had the middle name Brutus. He took it very seriously. He saw this as kind of a divine, imprimatur on what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so I found this. This is not from Richard, but this also reminded me of when he's on the run after killing Lincoln.
Booth
is, and he writes in this little diary, which you can see it's on display at Ford's Theater today. And he writes, after being hunted like a dog through swamps, woods, and last night being chased by gunboats till I was forced to return wet, cold, and starving, with every man's hand against me, I am here in despair. And why? For doing what Brutus was honored for. What made Tell a hero, and yet I, for striking down a greater tyrant than they ever knew, am looked upon as a common cutthroat. My action was purer than either of theirs. One hoped to be great himself. The other had not only his country's, but his own wrongs to avenge. I hoped for no gain. I knew no private wrong. I struck for my country and that alone. And of course, he's speaking about the South, a country that groaned beneath this tyranny and prayed for this end. And yet now, behold the cold hands they extend to me. A little bit of a drama queen there.
Yeah, come on.
Johnny. So I just thought it was interesting how Wilkes Booth misread the situation in the same way that the conspirators misread the situation after Caesar. When Lincoln was killed, the South didn't respond with, hooray, the tyrant's dead.
Right. Well, some portions did.
Some did, but by and large, it was, both sides were exhausted from it and wanted it to be over.
Right.
And so, he saw himself as this grand hero, and
I don't think that's the judgment of history on the whole.
Yes.
But it is very interesting on that same page, 65, when we see the only time Jackson quoted Caesar. Says Richard, the only time, ironically, Jackson ever quoted Caesar was in an incident involving Calhoun, then his vice president, in 1830. After discovering that it had been Calhoun who had spoken against him at a cabinet meeting over a decade earlier, Jackson had written to Calhoun, quote, I had a right to believe that you were my sincere friend, and until now never expected to have occasion to say of you, in the language of Caesar, Et tu, Brute? That strikes me as funny.
It is funny, right? So it's a quote of it's knowledge of Caesar by way of Shakespeare.
Yeah, it's knowing very little, honestly.
Right.
But Jackson was one of those backwoodsmen, right?
Right.
Like Sam Houston, and who was the third in the trifecta we talked about last time?
Oh gosh, I don't know who would be the third persona there.
It was Lincoln.
Oh, Lincoln. Oh,
Yeah.
of course, right.
The backwoods triumvirate. They didn't need that classical learning.
Right. So if you consider it from that point of view, the Et tu, Brute is it's not bad.
No, it's apropos. Mm-hmm. Well, Jeff, we got to get out of here, but
Okay.
we're leaving a lot of ground uncovered, aren't we?
Do you want to just kind of give our audience a sense of what else is left in this chapter?
Let's give them the lay of the land,
Okay.
sort of book topography. So if they want to scan ahead to page 70, they can read about the debate over federal power, which is fascinating. And then the next section, page 73 and following, Calhoun's adaptation of the mixed government theory.
Okay.
So this is Polybius, right? That the best sort of government is a mixture of monarchical or aristocratic, Republican or representative, and popular or democratic forms.
Yep.
And after that, the chapter winds down and sets us up for chapter 3.
Which is about what?
It's going to be about pastoralism and utilitarianism. And that's
Okay.
going to be the subject of a future episode.
Excellent.
So what would you recommend to the reader the listener who's fascinated by this material?
Well, I think they should pick up this book, right?
Yeah.
And read ahead. It's I find Richard very accessible.
Yes.
Very.
It's a really engaging writer.
It is, right. He drops these little bits of humor in there. His examples, his choices of his quotes are perfect, and so the narrative flows very nicely. So
Yes.
it doesn't read like a stodgy academic textbook.
No, and the book is packed with examples and illustrations.
Yeah.
It's really phenomenal.
So we'll do our best to kind of
Right.
break down
That's right.
the main parts of it, but it can't replace the experience of reading the book for yourself.
No. So I know it's available in paperback. I would encourage the listener to go pick up a copy and read along with us as we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Then send us your impressions and your pushback. Maybe we're getting parts of it wrong. Maybe especially Jeff. And
Yeah. Well, probably especially me. Exactly.
Okay,
Thank you
thanks.
for that. But and I think
just let us know.
And Dave's getting a little I don't know
What?
affected because there was no corrigendum this week, and so bring him down to earth and send one of these things in, right?
It's going to take Elon Musk to bring me down to earth. You know, the SpaceX guy.
I got you. I got it.
Okay.
Right. Yes. Nicely done.
Thanks.
Right. Say, hey, but we got to get out of here.
We do.
Right.
Yep.
But before we go, I'm thinking our listeners, a lot of them would love to learn some Latin. They would love to learn some Greek. And Dave, you can help them with that.
I can. So let me talk about Latin first, and I'll seek to be brief. I have a program, Lingua Latina Per Se Illustrata, the Hans Orberg textbook. I've got 2 units available, chapters 1 through 9 and chapters 10 through 18. You can get quite a bargain on the 2 if you combine them together. This is at latinperdiem.com/shop, and check that out. And let's say you're more advanced than that, and you're thinking, I want to read more of the kind of stuff that the founders would have read. Well, you can take my Cicero's Latin Masterclass, where we cover De Natura Deorum. This is a great bargain, $75. You get 10 hours of instruction, the transcript, this is video instruction, for the whole course, and you get as much interaction with me, Tom accepted, as you want to by sending me emails and so forth. But maybe you're interested in theology, as many of our listeners are. You can also check out the Calvin's Institutes. This is the 1536 edition. And I've done 3 of these classes. They're all recorded. I'm interacting with live students. And all 3 sessions, which is 31 hours of expert instruction, all 3 sessions bundled together for $199.
That's a great deal.
So that's a pretty good deal. That's not too many Jacksons in order to check that out.
Right.
If you want to study Greek, go to mossmethod.com. Check out my free offerings on the YouTube channel, more than 2,100 Greek and Latin lessons for you to survey for free. Or you can sign up for the Greek course, which takes you from the very beginning, ab initio, and it leads you all the way from neophyte to
erudite.
Thanks. And then every Friday we have our Moffus hours. You can meet with me and other scholars from around the world to study Greek together.
Excellent. So that's mossmethod.com.
That's
and
correct.
for Latin, it's latinperdiem.com/LLPSI.
That's correct. Yeah.
Great.
And check out the YouTube channel. Jeff, you've got some things on the YouTubes too, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. I've
You
got
have some impressive 3D fly-throughs.
I got some fly-throughs. I got some a couple of tours through some ancient sites.
Yes, I got Epidaurus
and Dodona.
Eleusis, right?
Yeah. So you can check out if you just search up Jeffrey Winkle on YouTube, you can take a peruse that for
yeah. And you have some stuff on SoundCloud, am I not mistaken?
I do. SoundCloud.com/Jeff Winkle.
If you want to hear his performances as a vocalist, a composer, a guitarist, and a pianist, you play the bass?
I do.
Is the only thing you don't do is the drums?
The drums, but I'm learning that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I got my son a set of electronic drums, and
nice.
I'm playing them more than he does.
You got the cowbell?
So no, I need to add a
I really
cowbell.
like that.
That's right.
We have some people to thank, don't we, Jeff?
We do. Mishka, as always, our wonderful engineer, turns us around in record time with good cheer and humor and very little complaint.
Yes,
almost
that's right.
no complaint.
Well, that's because you just don't hear any of it. I get all of it.
Oh, that's right. Exactly.
No, I'm kidding. No, she's a wonderful sound engineer, very talented contributor.
And what about Scott Vincent and Ken Tamplin?
Yeah, well, Scott can play the guitar like he's ringing a bell. Yeah. Imagine you combine Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eddie Van Halen, blues, great, wonderful stuff. And he loans us the screaming guitar for the intro and the outro, composed by Ken Tamplin, and then the bumper music as well. Check these guys out if you want to learn how to sing or play rock music.
Yep.
And we're grateful that they contribute that little offbeat sort of thing to our typical nerdiness about the classics.
Exactly.
We want to keep it light.
That's right. And hey, if you want to drop us a note, if you want a shout out, you've got a corrigendum, you can write to Dave at adnauseum.com. Don't forget that V.
Or Jeff at adnauseum.com. Don't forget the V in ad nauseum. Check out our social media channels so that you can get in line for the Aristophanes giveaway from Hackett, our sponsor.
Yeah.
Jeff, what are we doing next week?
Next week, are we TBD?
I was thinking maybe we go back to Mahru.
Okay.
Lead that along a little bit, or maybe something else.
Let's see.
Keep it fresh.
We'll see what the muse has to say. Yes. And Dave, I believe you have our Gusturi parting shot.
I do. This is from one Joe Dunthorne from a work called Submarine. I know nothing about the author or the work, but I thought this was pretty good. I want to hear your thoughts. Says Joe, my mother tells me that I do not chew my food enough. She says I am making it harder for my body to get the essential nutrients it needs. If she were here, I would remind her that I am eating a blueberry Pop-Tart.
I like it.
You like it?
I like it, yes. I especially like it that there's no contact.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.